Hello and welcome to History Time. When we talk about Chepauk, we always think about the cricket ground, M.A. Chidambaram Stadium. But what about Chepauk Palace, which existed even before the cricket stadium came here? When I mention palace, you must be stunned. Am I talking about the governor's Raj Bhavan? You may be asking yourself. But that is in Guindy, it is not in Chepauk. There was a palace and there still is a palace. It's just that it is completely built over out of recognition today. Let me take you to Chepauk Palace and show you the various bits and pieces of it that survive. In the concluding years of the 17th century, much of what we recognize today as Tamil Nadu had Arcot as its capital. You must be again wondering, what am I talking about? Arcot is such a tiny town. Chennai is such a big metropolis. What happened to Chennai? Chennai was a tiny city, tiny village at that time belonging to the English. Arcot was the seat of the Nawabs of Arcot. The Nawabs of Arcot were feudatories to the Nizams of Hyderabad. The Nizams of Hyderabad were feudatories to the Mughal emperor in Delhi and Agra. By the beginning of the 18th century, the Mughal empire began to weaken. And thereafter, the Nizams of Hyderabad became independent. Eventually, the Nawabs of Arcot also became independent. During this time, the British East India Company was a supplicant to the Nawabs of Arcot. But you know how the British were. By treachery, by deceit, by battle, by several attempts, they gradually gained the upper hand. And by the 1760s, the Nawab of Arcot was actually dependent for his security on the British. Early in the 1760s, the Nawab of Arcot, Muhammad Ali Wallaja, decided that he would move to Madras to live under the protection of the British. He therefore decided to build a palace for himself in the city. And look at the magnanimity of the English. They gave him 117 acres of his own property so that he could build a palace for himself in the city. And that land was given in a village called Chepauk. Today, WhatsApp University claims that Chepauk gets its name from being a place where there were 6 gardens, Che Bagh, but there is no truth to that. Chepauk was a village with a name that already existed, for which we don't have any explanation. It was by the sea, and that is where the Nawab of Arcot was to build his palace. The contractor for this was Paul Benfield. Paul Benfield was an employee of the PWD department of the East India Company. He quickly learned the ways of how government contracts were floated, how tenders were bid for, and became an independent contractor himself. Notoriously corrupt, he would construct the Chepauk Palace, which is today celebrated as the first example of the Indo-Saracenic style of architecture in the whole world. The Nawab, during the time of the construction, as per East India Company records, lived in Mylapore. As to where he lived in Mylapore, we don't know. But there is one street which gives us a hint. There is Devadi Street in Mylapore, which even less than 50 years ago was Diodi Sardarul Mulk Dilawar Jang Bahadur. It was that Diodi which became Devadi over a period of time. And we left Sardarul Mulk Dilawar Jang Bahadur and forgot all about it. That or those words were the titles of the Nawab of Arcot. And it is very likely that he lived by Diodi Sardarul Mulk Dilawar Jang Bahadur and later shifted into the Chepauk Palace in 1768 when completed. Chepauk Palace did not face the sea. It faced the city of Madras. And access to Chepauk Palace was from Mount Road. You entered the palace via a huge triple-arched gateway, which doesn't stand any longer, near the Triplicane police station and the head office of the Tamil Nadu Tourism Development Corporation. It was demolished so thoroughly that not a trace of it survives. That was the main entrance to the palace. You then went towards the east, towards the sea, and then came to the enormous expanse of the palace itself. The palace had 2 principal wings. The southern side was the Humayun Mahal, which was the official part of the residence of the Nawab. This is where he met with visitors, conducted businesses of state, and this had the Diwan Khana, which is where much of the work of the Nawab was conducted. The other wing, which was on the northern side, was known as the Kalas Mahal because of a dome that existed on the top of it. This was the private quarters or the zanana of the Nawab. This is where he ate, this is where he slept, this is where the kitchens were. And even today, when you go there, you can make out that there is a mosque, which is where he prayed, on the first floor of the Kalas Mahal. The Mughal style of living always asked or demanded of a bath or hammam. And there were two reasons for that. One was India was a hot country. The Mughals bathed very frequently, they swam. The other was that they conducted all their extremely private discussions and conferences with their trusted advisors in the bath. In fact, the word for the bath was Ghusl Khana, which means the place of privacy, which is where they could conduct all their meetings. And the royal bath came up close to the sea. This was in the shape of an octagon, and 8 in Persian is Hasht, and therefore this building was known as the Hasht Bangla. It was very close to the sea, near where we have the Napier's Bridge today, and it faced the north. The reason for that is it needed water from the Kuam River for the Nawab and his family to bathe in, and that was the bathing pavilion. The Nawab moved into the Chepauk Palace in 1768, but he didn't have very long to live in it. One, the British were always scheming for ways and means of gaining control over him. And in 1801, following the death of Nawab Muhammad Ali Wallaja, they took over much of the Arcot kingdom or the Carnatic, and they made his successors titular Nawabs with a pension. And then in 1855, even that title was done away with, and even the pension was given the go-by. The Nawab's family was evicted from Chepauk Palace and was made to move into Triplicane. One of the principal reasons for this was that the British always resented such an impressive building belonging to the Nawab being by the sea. In fact, when visitors arrived by ship, the first building they noticed was always Chepauk Palace. Very few had any idea as to how grand its interiors were. In fact, we don't even have any descriptions of the interior of Chepauk Palace because the British were not even allowed inside it. But they disliked such a large building being present, and they were forever scheming on how to get control of it. And in 1855, they eventually succeeded. And as a symbol of their victory over that palace, they built a tower designed by the architect Robert Fellows Chisholm between the two wings, the Humayun Mahal and the Kalas Mahal. That stands even today. Chepauk Palace was brought to auction in 1855. It was a sham auction. Who could bid for such a big palace? The government was the only body that had the necessary funds. It acquired the palace and then divided it into multiple government departments. The eastern face belonged to the PWD or the Public Works Department. And Robert Chisholm in the 1860s gave it a new design in the Scottish baronial style, which is what you see even today as the PWD headquarters on the marina. The rear of the building, or the actual front face of the building, was given over to other departments, and the College of Engineering occupied much of it from the 1880s onwards till the 1920s, when it eventually shifted into Guindy. Thereafter, Chepauk Palace came to be occupied by many more government departments. You know what happens when the government occupies a building and what the level of maintenance can be. Over the years, Chepauk Palace lost much of its grandeur. Buildings were constructed all around it. It was hardly visible. And in 2012, a devastating fire broke out in Kalas Mahal. Much of the building caved in. The government immediately announced that it was going to demolish Chepauk Palace and construct a wedding hall in its place. But heritage lovers were up in arms. The Nawab of Arcot protested. Eventually, the government relented and decided to take up restoration. In 2014, work began. And that year, there was a fire in Humayun Mahal as well. And then work began on the restoration of Humayun Mahal also. And work has since continued and is now nearing completion. After the work is over, we are told that the National Green Tribunal, the Agricultural Department, and several other departments of the government will move in. We don't know what will be the maintenance of the structure after the restoration is over. What about the bathing pavilion? And what about the rest of the structures that stood in Chepauk Palace? You'll be amazed to know that the bathing pavilion was the only building on the marina for much of the 19th century. There was no University Senate House, no Presidency College, no Queen Mary's College, no DGP building, nothing. There was only the bathing pavilion that was standing there. And then next to the south of the bathing pavilion was the Nawab's saluting battery, which is where he inspected the troops. After the saluting battery, further south was the Nawab's artillery park, which is where the troops exercised their horses. The artillery park gave way to Presidency College. The saluting battery gave way to University Senate House. And the octagon, the Nawab's octagon, became a part of government estate. The bathing pavilion, Hasht Bangla, became a part of government estate. The governor, as you know, till independence lived in government estate itself. And his guests were housed in this bathing pavilion, which got a new name, Marine Villa. In 1927, Marine Villa was handed over to the university, and the zoology department began to function from there. By the 1930s, the university had grown to a great extent. It needed new offices, and so Marine Villa was demolished, and the university clock tower building, which is today the main office of the Madras University, came up on the site. So that was the end of Marine Bungalow as well. I said that the title of the Nawab was abolished in 1855. The pension was also stopped. But in 1857, you had the mutiny or the First Indian War of Independence. Thereafter, the governance of India came under the British Crown. The British felt that they had not dealt fairly with the Nawab, and therefore the title of Prince of Arcot was bestowed on the family in perpetuity, a pension was given, and it was also decided that a new residence would be built for him. This was a police court that stood in Triplicane. Robert Chisholm was asked to convert it into a palace, and that became Amir Mahal, the residence of the Nawabs of Arcot. When India became independent in 1947, the Nawab was one of few set of princes whose titles were recognized in perpetuity, as were their pensions, and also their status equal to that of a cabinet minister of state. That is honored even today by the government of India. Today, Chepauk Palace is hardly visible, and the remnants of it, Humayun Mahal and Khalas Mahal, await a new future. Only time will tell what will happen to them. But less than 200 years ago, can you imagine what the landscape on the marina must have been like? And yet it has all changed. That is history for you. I'll be back in the few next weeks with further interesting episodes. Bye for now.